Okay, it is now 2 o'clock, and so I resume the hearing. Before we go any further, if I could ask Mrs. Crooks to give us our housekeeping announcements.
Good afternoon. As before, there's no scheduled fire alarm test during the examination, so if the alarm does sound, please make your way to the nearest exit and gather on the corner of Claremont Terrace, which is outside the GMB building, which is just to your left as you go out the main doors. Do not stop to retrieve any belongings, but exit as quickly and safely as possible following the green fire exit routes. And do not enter the building until a fire marshal or member of the fire service tells you it's safe to do so. Please only use the main doors to access and exit the building. For security purposes, do not use the side doors unless you are a wheelchair user and someone is available to unlock and relock the door after you. Just to also make you aware that there are other users in the building, as there are language classes going on at the same time. The toilets are situated on the ground floor in the corridor adjacent to the main hall, which is just at the back of that wall. Water is available for the participants around the table, and anybody who's in the public gallery, there's water available down in the foyer. Other refreshments are available in Gilligate as some coffee shops, and there's also a Sainsbury's Express on Bootham. Just to remind everyone that the sessions are being recorded, so if you have any issues regarding being filmed, if you could let me know, then I can seat you somewhere where you're not going to be picked up. The Wi-Fi is available. It's Citadel Guest, and the password is General Booth 1883, and it is written on the two posters either side of the building. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Carol. As we do have some fresh, or at least fresher faces around the table this afternoon, I think it would be worth doing brief introductions, starting with the council side and just going around the table.
Thank you, sir. Matthew Henderson, instructed by the City Solicitor on behalf of the City of York Council.
Good afternoon, everyone. Laura Bartle with the City Council, Principal Planner.
Jane Healy-Brown from Arup on behalf of the Council on Greenbelt Matters.
Good afternoon, Stuart Natkus on behalf of Barton David Wilson Homes with regards to site ST33.
Hello everyone, Paul Hinton, Town Planner at DIO.
Tim Collard, Avison Young, Planning Consultant on behalf of DIO for ST36.
Robert Arnold, resident of 3 Millfield Court, which jumps onto the back of ST33.
Andy Bell, Weldrake resident.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Welcome, everyone. So just so everyone's aware, the discussion this afternoon will be a structured-ish, at least, discussion, looking first of all at sites ST33 and ST36. I'll normally, at least, initially look to the council to answer the questions that I've posed in my matters, issues and questions, and any further questions that I might have. As the discussion goes along, if you want to sort of get into the debate, if you can sort of upend your nameplate like so, and I'll bring you in at an appropriate point. If you do have any questions about the process or the procedure, I don't know if you've got any now. You can ask, or if we have any as you go along, don't feel that you can't ask. Please do. I want to make sure that everyone knows what's going on. So if when you do speak, if you can put your microphone on, and then when you finished speaking, if you turn it off, that's great. Thanks. And as well, if I can also ask people. If you can move your microphone quite close, because just a little movement makes a significant amount of difference, which that hopefully demonstrated then. So going first of all then, as I said, and unless there are any questions on the procedure or what's going to happen this afternoon, we'll go straight away to site ST33. That's a station yard in Weldrake, and that is proposed to be allocated in the plan through policy SS18. It appears that you've taken the helm for this afternoon, Mr. Henderson.
I have, sir, yes. I hope we'll move swiftly.
My understanding is that there isn't a statement of common ground for this site, unless I've missed something.
There isn't, sir, no, but hopefully you've seen from the matters statement that there is essentially total agreement as to the principle of the allocation, the wording of the policy and the greenbelt boundaries as between ourselves and the developer, and well, I take it from the nods that remains the position. So you don't have it formally recorded, but we can confirm that that's the position to you today.
Okay, yeah, and people that have attended regularly will know this. So I haven't been out yet to look at the proposed sites, but with ST33 and indeed all of them, I will be doing that in due course. So if you need to explain anything about, about the site, it's kind of helpful if you could sort of explain to me where. I mean, and then obviously I'll see that when I visit. So, yeah, perhaps if the council could tell me, first of all, what the site currently is, and then talk me through the council's thinking in relation to the proposed greenbelt boundary, which in effect allocates the site.
Yes, sir, Ms Bartle will talk through that.
Yes, so the site itself lies on the southwestern edge of the village. It is largely greenfield site, relatively well contained, and we'll come on to boundaries shortly, I'm sure, and is a site that has been promoted by a house builder. There is an application that is currently before the council and being considered, a full application that was submitted at the end of last year and currently pending decision. No significant issues have been identified through that application process. The proposal is for 150 properties, which is largely consistent with the capacity that the local plan allocates the site for. The allocation indicates 158 dwellings on the site. We haven't proposed to modify the capacity to deal with the what's been presented in the application, the scheme that's being dealt with, largely because that hasn't been determined as yet, but and the numbers are relatively consistent.
In the submitted plan in policy SS18, we have 147, don't we?
We do, yes. Sorry, yes. Did I say 158? I may have done, yes. Apologies, no, you are correct. I appear not to be able to read numbers. Yes, but in any event, because the council is, or the decision is still being awaited and the application pending, we're not proposing to change that at the moment. But we don't see that as significant. There are some minor changes to the policy that have been proposed, largely consistency matters that we've dealt with in previous sessions. So the first criterion dealing with the housing mix, as you'll recall, is proposed to be deleted as a consistent approach across all of the policies. I'll come back to that one. Criterion 4 of policy SS18 is a modification that was presented and consulted upon in earlier rounds of consultation as a response to the HRA findings, and the modification proposed at Criterion 8 is simply, again, a wording, it's not in principle change, it's just for consistency with the rewording approach that we've taken to matters relating to developer contributions on education. We are also seeking to propose, which we haven't tabled, I can get the right piece of paper, at Criterion 2, given our earlier discussions, I think yesterday, in relation to criterion that related to or required high standard of design, where we resolved at the end of that to delete those provisions, not because we didn't think design was important, but simply because we agreed and accepted it was dealt with in other policies, DP1 notably.
That's to say, just so that everyone around the table is clear, because obviously there are people here that today that weren't here previously. So to make it clear that the council is proposing in this policy and in all of the other policies that allocate houses as well, where there is a criteria that says that the development should be of a high design standard, to delete that from the site allocation policy itself, because that's not to say the council doesn't want a high design standard. It certainly does, but there is another policy in the plan already that deals with that and sets out those requirements, not just for those sites where it happens to be mentioned in the policies, but it applies to anything potentially. So
just to continue that point, just want to make it clear that we're not suggesting in this instance that we delete it in its entirety in the way that the wording appears in policy SS18. We recognise that the site is adjacent to the conservation area. So in this particular case, we're instead suggesting that the first section, which is be of a high design standard, to which will, that is deleted, and instead it would read, provide an appropriate new extension to Weldrake whilst maintaining the character of the village. We feel that's an important point given the location of this site and its relationship to the village and the sensitivity around the conservation area that needs to be incorporated in any of the site's development.
okay, I understand. You said the site was largely a greenfield site.
It is. There are some aspects of built development on its sort of southern southwestern section. So it's, if you were to define it as such, part brownfield, part greenfield. But it does adjoin on its western side some relatively small-scale industrial or commercial uses, and then some residential uses on the northern and some of its eastern boundary.
Okay, thank you for that. And what about in terms of the Greenbelt assessment?
Thank you. So I was slightly thrown that my plan suddenly shifted to somewhere else there on screen. So in terms of the Greenbelt assessment, the site is considered to be largely an infill within the village, contained largely by development, which means that it minimises sprawl and encroachment. So those are the important factors here in Greenbelt terms. It also avoids areas which have important connections to the historic rural setting of the village as well. Which
Forgive me, Miss Brown, I didn't catch that. And also, admirably quick delivery, but a little too speedy for my note-taking to keep up.
I apologise, sir, I shall slow down. So it is largely an infill site, so does not cause challenges in terms of sprawl and encroachment, and there aren't purposeful heritage implications as we've had in a number of the sites that we've talked about to date. From a boundary point of view...
When you say no heritage implications, apart from its relationship to the conservation area.
But from a Greenbelt point of view with purpose for and so on. And from a boundary perspective, it is viewed to have a recognisable and permanent features along the majority of the boundary. Parts of it, as I mentioned, are adjoining the existing settlement. But the actual greenbelt boundary which would be created would be along the southern and the western side, which is largely hedge and tree-lined field boundaries and some road boundaries as well.
The road boundary being that to the west, is it? Sorry, the east, is it?
This is where I was thrown slightly by my plan suddenly going astray. Yes, and then you've got the junction at the very top with Main Street as well on the northern boundary. That will be the boundary around the settlement of Weldrake then.
And that appears to be where the access would come from, is that right?
Yes, sir, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, are you being invited to add something to that, Ms. Bartle?
No, sir. Main Street is where the access is proposed from in the extant application.
I don't know which one of you indicated first, but I'll take Mr. Arnold.
Can I talk very quickly a little history? In 1988, when the development which abutts onto the green field was built, it was said that the whole of the area was green belt and you could see for miles. And then in 2001 thereabouts, the farmer built a hedge consisting of bushes and trees. So you can imagine from 2001 to 2022, that minor hedge has now become what appears to break the field into two parts. So it was one field with a farm track along it, and there's no ditch where the bushes are. And to say that it's now a self-contained site, it's an artificially self-contained site. And it was done at the time when the plan was to build houses actually on the green field. And the inspector at the time duly noted that it was a poor attempt to try and break it off. But of course, 21 years later, it now appears to be a separate area of the village. And as described by one of the council colleagues, a separate area and self-contained. It's artificially self-contained, is my point.
I understand. Mr. Bell.
Okay. I'd just like to say that the ST33 boundary doesn't actually exist. This site was originally allocated as H49 and was constantly rejected. And at some point, an employment site, E7, as part of the industrial estate, was added on to H49 to take it over the 5 hectares so that they could be more lenient with its assessment. We know this from as far back as September 2017 when we had a presentation done to the parish and the representative was asked what that land was going to be used for. Given his plan had no dwellings on it, and he said he didn't know. Subsequently dropped into a drop-in session with a planning officer and presented the same challenge to them. Initially, they were quite abrupt with their response and said that employment land wasn't required in the area. But when I pointed out that E8, which is no longer a viable employment site, was allocated, they very quickly changed their response and indicated that it had been done because in actual fact the H49 site wasn't a sustainable site and didn't score enough points. And the current application that is in reflects the H49 site that has always been rejected.
Did either of you two want to share your views with me about how you see this land functioning in terms of greenbelt?
Presently, it's a Grade 2 agricultural field, and it's on an annual basis. There's different crops on it each time. I just see that continuing, particularly with a shortage of sustainable food production.
Just to add to that as well, there is a large and varied amount of wildlife on that patch, because obviously the strip that leads from Main Street down to the business at the bottom is largely untouched and full of wildflowers and other foliage. Obviously there's a lot of wild birds in the area. There's deer that are in that field quite often when there are no crops. We've got swifts that fly out from the houses over the border of that feeding. And the road, the back lane south that leads from Main Street is very heavily used, and in particular in the pandemic it was a lot more and more people were using that for the daily exercise.
Forgive me, Mr. Bell. I didn't quite catch that last point.
So the road, back lane south, that actually borders the field, allows for a large amount of public access. That's where people go on their daily walks. And during the pandemic, it was heavily used.
Not sure who I look to in the first instance on this side.
So we'll take it in stages. If we can deal with the Greenbelt comments first, Ms Healy-Brown will deal with that, and then we'll deal with, secondly, with the site allocation points.
So to respond to the boundary point, we're looking at the boundary that's proposed in the permanent features. I've described what they are, so they are recognisable and permanent features as they stand at the moment on that site. I note what residents have said in terms of potential ecological and agricultural land value. That's not part of my remit because they aren't part of the Greenbelt purposes.
So from our perspective, sir, nothing you've heard today changes the assessment that's been made. In fact, the fact that 20 years has passed and what may have previously have been thought to be a temporary boundary has become permanent rather reinforces the conclusions that Ms Healy-Brown has given to you in her assessment today. So that's part one. Part two is the allocation and the site selection process. I'll give you a reference to a document with which you're already very familiar, CD 9C. PDF page 384, and what you have there at the top of that page is the audit trail, so setting out when and how this site has come through the process, and Miss Bartle will talk you through that in very brief summary now.
Yes, it's correct to say that the previous versions of the plan have looked at this site slightly differently. As Mr Henderson has outlined, that the audit trail of that is provided in the Council's essay. As it was originally included in the former draft plan, it was a smaller site with a smaller yield. The extension was around the area to the south of those existing industrial units, and was considered to offer a better opportunity to provide a more sustainable option.
Forgive me, what was it that was thought to provide an opportunity?
By extending the site and creating a slightly bigger area and therefore capacity on the site, provided more scope for the benefits that could be brought forward by additional and sensible growth of the village to be achieved on the site. The site, as you'll know when you go out on your site visit, is well located. There are some facilities within the village, and the site therefore helps to sustain those facilities in the future by providing additional population to support things like the primary school. So the audit trail that you see will provide the detail of how the changes have been made, but in simple terms, that the site was assessed as being suitable and sustainable and indeed deliverable, with the confirmation of a willing landowner who's committed to bringing the site forward.
And so just to be clear, as you'll see from the audit trail, it was included in the 2014 aborted local plan publication draft at that time. It was then included in the preferred sites consultation 2016, and again in the pre-publication draft 2017, and in the publication draft 2018, and then obviously through to the plan that you have before you for examination. So there is, in my submission, much greater consistency there than was perhaps suggested in some of the objectors' comments.
Ms Bartley, you referred to two things there, one being scope for benefits, and the other being facilities in the village, and you mentioned the primary school. I wondered if you could elaborate on those. What benefits and what facilities?
I think what we're trying to say here is that this is a site where it forms, well, firstly, a sensible and logical extension to the village. We know that we're setting greenbelt boundaries for the first time, and we see that the form of the allocation as it's presented is a sensible one and would avoid further difficulty of extending that further. The additional capacity that is or could be achieved on that additional bit of land, as I said, would provide additional population in the village, which is critical for sustaining local services, particularly in rural communities like this one. There is a school, there is a local pub, and some other small commercial activity peppered through the village, all of which would benefit from the development. And we therefore see that it is a sensible location. There are some considerations that need to be carefully managed through the proposals and the developments or the development that could come forward on the site. And these are dealt with through the policy with respect to the conservation area and the sensitivities related to the historic character of the village. ecological and biodiversity issues associated with nearby assets, things such as the there's the local there's Bar and Ramsar sites to which we've given appropriate consideration to through the protection that Criterion 4 offers, and also the contributions that the financial contributions that would be made to the school, in addition to actually having additional children attending the school, would both in themselves provide notable benefits.
And so they're all matters that have been specifically focused on in respect of this village and are part of the allocation. If you consider criteria and 6, 7 and 8 in the draft policy, you will see that there the creation of new facilities, provision of on-site open space, additional amenity green space and children's play facilities, and then those financial contributions having regard in particular to the nursery, primary and secondary facilities to enable expansion and the accommodation of further demand. So specifically dealt with in the policy.
Mr. Bell.
Yeah, so the extension that's been added to H49 is no longer available. It's in business use. And as I stated, the H49, the current application that is submitted has no dwellings earmarked for that additional land. Also, the inclusion of the smaller H49 site in 2014 had the whole of the western boundary landscaped out to hide the industrial estate. Based on the current application that's in, that would replace approximately 50 dwellings, reducing the delivery considerably. And there is an alternative site in Weldrake that is not in the green belt, which would fulfil providing additional school children and other services. The school also provides for Thorganby, the neighbouring village, and Thorganby has had some 30 dwellings earmarked for development since this plan was submitted. So, and the school is already oversubscribed.
Sorry, the school in Weldrake is oversubscribed, you say, partly as a result of pupils coming from elsewhere into the village, into that school.
Other development in the village and in the adjoining village, because it's a school that is jointly serviced by Weldrake and Thorganby, because many years ago Thorganby closed its school and it buses its children into Weldrake School, and I think it's known as the Weldrake and Thorganby Church of England School.
Mr. Henderson.
So thank you. So the alternative site that's been referred to today, we're not aware of anyone promoting an emission site as an alternative before you. So you don't have willing landowner before you promoting an alternative from which you could choose or take a different course. That's the first thing. On the oversubscription of the local school, that rather confirms Ms Bartle's analysis of provision specifically included within the policy to ensure that school can grow appropriately. So there's no inconsistency with the analysis of Ms Bartle in that regard. As to what's been brought forward within this application, the developer will no doubt want to comment on that in due course, But what it doesn't change is the assessment that you've heard from Miss Healy-Brown as to what the appropriate position is in respect of the green belt.
In terms of Criterion 8 in the policy, financial contributions to, amongst other things, the primary school there. Is the primary school physically capable of the expansion needed?
Yes, as far as our assessments have been undertaken, they are, and you'll see Appendix 1 to EXCYC 79, which provides the overview of the school provision, where sites require on-site provision and where contributions are to be made, and the like. That's Appendix 1 to that document.
Sorry, Appendix
1.
Mr. Natkus.
Thank you, sir. Just quickly on this site, I mean, you'll see when you go out on site, it is sort of split into two, that you've got the southern part of an employment site, a large building on there, and then a field to the east. And it does appear a very logical greenbelt boundary, making very limited contribution to the five purposes. And that's in submissions and also the council's evidence, and I won't go any further on that. Looking at the history of it, obviously the council looked to have a larger area than the original H allocation because of additional benefits they thought it would bring. The settlement in terms of where it is in the hierarchy and the council's distribution all fits with that, and I can understand why they wanted to do that. But again, with many of these things, when you're looking at the early stages, what you think can fit into land and what will be acceptable is sort of ballpark figures, which is why I think they've got the approximately 147. And it's quite right that the current application that's in is only within the eastern part of that site. However, it is delivering the allocation in terms of what's in there. So now that detailed master planning, constraints planning, etc. has been looked at, it is possible to fit those homes in effectively what was that original H allocation. And if it was just a H allocation for that site, I don't think there would be any soundness issues. That being said, in terms of the application...
Yeah, sorry, I don't follow you, Mr. Natkus. Could you explain that to me in words so simple that I can understand?
Well, I think if it was H33, just for the square field and the rest of the land was in the green belt, I don't think we would be having any different conversation, effectively. However, the council, because we can fit the numbers just within that parcel of land, so that the concerns raised in terms of...
Are you proposing a main modification reducing the size of the site?
I'm not certain, no, because it's an approximate number. So what I was going to come on to say is in terms of the policy, there are two types of condition effectively or criteria. Some of them are design-led to deal with the application itself, so looking at buffers and boundaries and mix, etc. And others are then positive contributions to the settlement of Wheldrake, such as the delivery of financial contributions, open space. The application deals with all of those, so it mitigates the site itself and ticks all of those boxes. And it also delivers the open space and the contributions that the council are accepting. Now, the other parcel of land, if that were to come forward in the future, would effectively just contribute to that more because it would mitigate itself with the same constraints, as it were, but then it would also pay contributions, so there'd be added benefits. So effectively what I'm saying is our planning application, excluding that land, doesn't make the allocation unsound because they're quite separate. So we're not preventing it coming forward for further homes in the future, we're not conflicting it. So I think the whole site is deliverable, and ultimately the application proves that. You're looking confused, sir.
Yeah, not sure I followed that, to be honest.
Okay, I think the suggestion being made from the residents is that part of the site is not available, and that's then an issue of soundness. My point is the actual application that's in fully delivers what the policy requires and delivers the allocation. And it doesn't go on to prejudice that land should it become available in the future. So whilst that land isn't available now, allegedly, that doesn't mean that the allocation is unsound, because the planning application that's in on a large part of the site delivers all of the requirements in terms of the contributions, and it mitigates itself. So if that land wasn't available, it would be a case of a modification rather than an issue of the plan, but I'm not in a position to say whether that land is available or not. The point that I'm then saying is that if you didn't have a modification, you left the allocation exactly as it is, our application delivering circa 140 units doesn't prejudice another 15, 20 homes coming forward on that land in the future were it to become available. Equally, if that land didn't come available, the allocation has been delivered in full by our planning application, which is why I'm not suggesting a modification, because I think it provides flexibility for the future by leaving the whole of the site in.
Okay, a few things on that. First of all, just so that I'm absolutely clear, which area of land does the... No, the first point is, it's an application, you don't have permission. The second is, just for the avoidance of any doubt in my mind, what part of the allocation does the application relate to?
So if you have the proposals map in front of you...
The policies map, I do.
Sorry, policies map. It's been a long day. Did I say permission as well? I definitely meant application. It is at application stage. So if you have the map in front of you, you'll see that there's an existing building on there next to it. It says Millfield Industrial Estate. It's effectively the field to the east of that. So it's the square field. Does that make sense?
No.
So I think you can do this by reference to our matter statement in the appendix to that.
So looking at the allocation, you've got a part that, to the southwest that is a sort of square-ish kind of shape, and then you have a larger part to the east of that. Is that how it's divided?
So yes, so if you look at page, well, you don't have to get it up, but on page 9 of the appendices to our matter statement, you see exactly that. So it's the larger quadrangle shape.
Do you want to just draw on my map?
Of course, yes.
Okay, right, so I understand that now. Okay, good. Yeah, that helps the other parts of the puzzle sort of fit together in my mind now. The land outside of the planning application area then, Mr. Nakris, is that land available?
I'm not sure is well, I do not know is the honest answer. The land on the application clearly is available. It does not form part of the application. There's no contract that my client has on that land. Whether or not the landowner is saying it's unavailable, I have no knowledge of that. I just know that my client...
Is it a different landowner?
It is, yes.
Ms. Bartle?
We're just pulling up the pro forma for just one moment.
As you will no doubt second guess, my question is, do we have a willing landowner for that part of the site?
Our assessment, earlier assessments were, and we thought that we did, only on evidence that's been presented today is it suggesting that we don't have for that site.
When did you last ask the landowner?
Specifically, I would have to come back to you on that. I think.
But this might be one of those points that makes no difference, and if I can explain why. Because the part that's been omitted is the part which already has some development on it, with the building that you've been shown. So what we're not asking you to allocate undeveloped greenfield land without a willing landowner. I could understand that that might be objectionable, but that's not where we are with this allocation. So even if you were to assume against us no willing landowner, then this isn't one of those sites where that's going to be an issue in the way I've just described. But Ms. Bartle will, if we can track that information down for you in the next 30 seconds, we will tell you.
Yeah, but as I say, I haven't been out there yet, so I have no idea currently what it looks like. What's the building on this western portion?
It's the old buffer depot, and that is included in the H49 boundary. The additional land is actually on the industrial estate. Historical applications have been submitted for that part of the land for industrial warehouses.
So it's an old depot building of some sort?
That's included in the H49 boundary, yes. The additional land that we stated was E7, i.e. round the bottom of the industrial estate, that there's nothing on there. It's used by a business as part of an outdoor play area.
So this is the bit to the south of what on the policies map is called E8, which is... do
you want me to come and show you on the map?
Yeah, come and show me.
Can I just say that the buffer depot is at one of these ex-government stores where they used to hold flour, biscuits, that kind of stuff as a strategic stock after the Second World War, and they were only closed down in the 1980s.
So I think taking into account everything you've just heard, the options that you're faced with are either to go with our allocation on the basis of what you've heard from the promoter, and on the basis that this land, we're not asking you to allocate undeveloped greenfield. The alternative is to just reduce the allocation to that which is part of the covered by the application. I wouldn't accept there's a third option to not allocate at all, just to be very clear.
You can call me an old-fashioned traditionalist, Mr. Henderson, but when it comes to allocating land for development, I do like to know that the landowner is willing in relation to the development being proposed. So it seems to me that the council may well have a choice in terms of speaking to the landowner, but if that parcel is to remain in the plan, I think that will be necessary.
Well, so we will take that away. I hear everything you say. Miss Bartle will either be able to track down in slightly slower time later that correspondence, or if we don't have that, or we don't have up-to-date correspondence, we can have further correspondence to fully understand the position as at today. And then we can come back to you along the lines of my two options to give an indication if that's acceptable.
Yep, okay, so if we can add that then to the homework list for the council to clarify the willing landowner or not willing landowner situation.
Yeah, so that's absolutely fine. We've written that down as our homework. We'll come back to you and clarify the position. The only further comment I would say is that nothing, either my option 1 or my option 2, doesn't change the green belt boundary. But, you know, we would maintain the same greenbelt boundary to the village, even if we were to reduce the allocation, because of the characteristics that we've described in greenbelt terms. And indeed, which have been confirmed in large part by what you've heard from the objectors today. So I'm just impressing on the need to treat the two as distinct here.
It's never lost on me, Mr. Henderson.
Very grateful, sir.
Mr. Arnold.
Just a quickie. I'm not sure the relevance, but one of the big concerns is that this site has grown in terms of size and allocation of numbers of dwellings. Originally it was 109, if we go back far enough, and now it's 147, and it's completely out of keeping with the density of dwellings in certainly the west end of Weldrake, completely. We've had one or two new developments at the east end of Weldrake where there have been denser populace of dwellings. But with the east end and from the centre of the village through to the east to the west end, it's this proposal of 150 plus houses is completely out of keeping. I'm not sure of the relevance in terms of planning, but it just seems completely out of keeping with the keeping. And we talked about it being in keeping with the village appearance and outlook, and this clearly is not.
Yeah, just to be clear on one thing. So there are two things sort of going on in parallel here. One is obviously this examination, and what I have what I'm looking at is this plan, which shows the area that it shows, including at the moment at least this area to the west. The old where the old depot is, and a policy that says within that area, approximately 147 dwellings should be delivered. In parallel with that, we have Mr. Natkus and his planning application, which is for, I think, 150 or thereabouts, just a couple of dwellings difference in effect to that number. But as I now understand it, that relates to the smaller area. So obviously that's a different kind of density. That's a planning application. That's not for me to comment on. But if the council were to discover that the landowner for the land to the, why do I keep forgetting, to the west, where the old depot is not in fact willing, well, the council says that wouldn't affect the greenbelt boundary, even if it would mean that they would propose to take that bit of the housing allocation out. It might, though, have an impact in relation to what the policy says about the number of dwellings, but that in turn might depend on what happens with the planning application, because if the council in the meantime were, for example, to give Mr. Natkus the permission he's after, then the number might be changed to reflect what has been given planning permission, potentially. These things always get a little bit complicated during examinations, especially long-running ones like this, and ones where you almost invariably have planning applications that are running alongside as well, which can get quite confusing. It confuses me sometimes anyway, put it that way.
So I agree with everything that you've just said. I'd add only for comfort to the objectors that, of course, the density of what is proposed in that plan application will be assessed as part of that application for its acceptability in its own right, firstly. Secondly, as to your point about would the numbers need to change, possibly. All I would say on that, though, in respect of the allocation, is that, as we've been clear all along, we're not setting targets. And with that in mind, we have a figure there, but there would be a certain flexibility to its approach, and a very large part of that is development management and the consideration of what is proposed by way of layout and design, etc.
Mr. Bell?
Yeah, I would like to just revisit this alternative site, H28, land north of North Lane. I mean, the planning officers did recommend it be included in the plan, and it has been allocated as housing since as far back as 2005 in the draft local plan. It's there in Appendix E. So, you know, there's really no need to alter the greenbelt boundaries in this instance when we have a site that is not in the greenbelt.
Just to help me out, Mr. Bell, when you say it was recommended for inclusion by officers, was that in relation to this version of the local plan, or was it the previous one, or something else?
It was in relation to this local plan. For many years, it was part of this local plan, and then at the last hour, it had a technical issue, which I find, you know, quite bizarre, given it was allocated since as far back as 2005. Yeah, and then, as I say, it was to be added back into the plan, but the council decided not to do it. I think that was at the point when they were becoming under pressure from central government to deliver a plan, or it would be taken over.
Can you help me any further with that, Ms. Bartle?
I'm afraid so. I can't provide specific reference. I think... Oh.
So what I can show you, though, is the audit trail where that came in and then went out. So to be clear, never in respect of this plan has that site been allocated.
Yeah, I think the point really was whether it was among the alternatives put forward for this plan.
It was considered, sir, but it wasn't taken forward. Certainly, it wasn't taken forward as of January 2018. CD9C, PDF page 396. And you're looking...
Forgive me, I didn't catch the reference.
Let me do that again. CD9C, PDF page 396. It's the site described as site reference 11.
So it was among the much larger number of sites that were put forward to the council, in effect suggested to the council, but was sifted out at an earlier stage of the site selection process?
Yes, at a very early stage, certainly by January of 2018. That's the first point. The second point, though, is I would push back on the suggestion that the one was in and one was outside of the greenbelt boundaries. We're setting the boundaries for the village for the first time here. And I do persist with ensuring that they are considered separately.
I think...
Let's go on, Ms. Barton.
Sorry, apologies. No, I can just add on to what Ms. Henderson has just said. The basis for that change was related to access challenges and the officer assessment that was undertaken, which deemed that to be sufficient to rule it out as part of the allocations.
Difficulties with access?
Indeed, yes.
Okay, I'm not going to go too much further down this road, I have to say, because I'm not examining the sites that aren't in the plan. I'm examining those that are in them, but I will take a final point from this side.
Yeah, the access query was actually resolved and the officers recommended it should be included in the plan.
The executive decision was taken in July 2017 for it not to be included as an allocation.
is not proposed in the plan.
Indeed, yes. Sorry.
Okay, good. I've got a pretty clear picture of all of that now, I think. Is there anything else, Mr. Bell or Mr. Arnold, that you wanted to tell me today? Okay, thank you. Is there anything else from the council's side?
So, no, thank you.
Yeah, just one general point from me. Inevitably, I'm hearing quite a bit about planning applications that are pending with the council and sometimes with my colleagues or with the Secretary of State in some instances. If you would, even if it is at appeal or if it is with the Secretary of State, please do not assume that I will be aware of any outcome having been forthcoming, because I won't. That is not a thing that the Inspectorate would automatically tell me about. So if you could keep on top of that and let me know as and when, I'd be grateful.
Yes, sir, of course. There's certainly some that we are waiting with bated breath for, and as we know, we will let you know.
Yeah, if you could keep a sort of running list, frankly, and there will come a point a little further on in the examination process when that will become more important from my perspective.
It's just a running list of the planning status in effect of each site.
Grateful for that. So unless there's anything else on this site, I will, what will I do? Are we likely to be long, do we think, on ST36? If so, I might just take a short adjournment.
So I would ask for 5 minutes, only for this purpose, that I may be able to agree of certain matters with Mr. Trollard and Mr. Hinton in that 5-minute period, which will speed us up more than the 5 minutes that I would take, if I can put it like that.
I think I can be a bit more generous than 5 minutes, if only for myself, Mr. Henderson. Okay, but thank you for that. So I make it 15:02. I'll adjourn the hearing then to resume at, let's leave it as late as 15:20. Thank you.